At NTT, we push the boundaries of what is possible. We're trusted globally to connect data, things, and people in ways that transform and improve business, society, and the planet. Every day we work together to create new connections, new insight, and new value, delivering IT services and solutions across a breadth of world-class technologies. In collaboration with leading partners, helping our clients across healthcare, education, smart cities, manufacturing, retail, and more, to accelerate positive change. We're renowned for some major inventions, like emojis used by billions globally to express themselves without using words, and launching the first enterprise multi-country private 5G solution. We're one of the world's leading network providers, and we're the technology partner that powers the Tour de France, revolutionizing the viewing experience for the world's most watched sporting event. It's our belief in possibility that drives us, but it's our people that make it happen. At NTT, what you do matters. What are you waiting for? NTT. Here you can.
Hello everyone, I absolutely love that video. It's such a great intro. Very, very warm welcome to this NTT Data LinkedIn Live session. The topic today is all around infrastructure lifecycle management and critically how that makes an impact on our clients' ability to execute their digital strategy in the modern world today. My name is Gary Middleton. I'm Vice President of Network and Go-to-Market here at NTT Data in Europe. And I'm joined by two colleagues I've had a fantastic relationship over years. Really respect them, and really they are the best for the topic today because given their backgrounds. And so, Roberto, perhaps across to you. Would you mind doing an intro first, please?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Roberto Fasiani. I've been with NTT for almost 3 decades. I'm VP of Software and Support Services for NTT Technology Solution in Europe, and I work almost every day around on the topics that we are going to address today.
Fantastic, Roberto. Thank you. And then David, across to you.
Yes, sir. David Zimmerman. I'm a Senior Director in Software Analytics here at NTT Data. I've been with the company for 14 years, and my day-to-day is all around our clients' assets and helping them optimize and use and reduce risk, increase value around those.
Yes, some serious experience on this call. So thank you very much for joining us. And just as a bit of housekeeping, if any questions that you may have through the session, please post them to the chat. We'll address them towards the back end of the conversation, and we'll definitely create some time for some Q&A. But firstly, just on this topic. So I said at the beginning that infrastructure lifecycle management is absolutely vital for our clients. And if you just think about what our clients do with their infrastructure, it ultimately allows them to execute their business strategy in a digital world. The infrastructure houses their applications and business services and data. The infrastructure allows them to connect. It allows their employees to have a wonderful experience in the workplace. The infrastructure secures the data and the assets and the applications that we use day in and day out. And so there's no doubt that infrastructure is absolutely vital in the modern world. Now, here at NTT Data, we are instinctively know that. We're in this game and we're in here day in and day out. But we wanted to test the market. So we conducted a piece of research to go and investigate how big a challenge this was for the market, for our clients, and is this really posing significant business risk for them? So we conducted this piece of research, and given our strength and scale, we execute technology in over 50 countries around the world. Through the decades, we've had significant amounts of data that we have access to. And so we did some analysis on 250 million assets that are currently deployed in our clients' environments. Those assets are installed across 130 countries. In addition to that, we did some surveys with our clients to get their perspectives on lifecycle management and the sustainability aspects of lifecycle management. And then lastly, we conducted a series of interviews with people in the field that are dealing with infrastructure lifecycle management on a day-to-day basis with our clients. So we were able to put this together to create a report And towards the end of the report, end of the session, we'll give you links to access that report so you can read it in your own time to get the real detail. But for us, the results were striking. There were, just to give you a perspective on some of those results, is that 8 out of 10 organizations that we discussed this with felt that visibility of the infrastructure was a challenge, and yet that was the starting point for how they managed the infrastructure lifecycle management, and they were always on the back foot, always firefighting when they didn't have that clear visibility. 8 out of 10, significant statistic. Another statistic would be 69%, which if we look at currently installed infrastructure, that by 2027, this would have moved past the milestone for end of support, which means, yes, it's 3 years out, but 70% of currently installed infrastructure will start introducing significant business risk, if not refreshed through that time period. Another great statistic would be the 133% growth in subscription license revenues that we've seen over the same period. So mass disaggregation of hardware and software purchasing programs. We'll explore that through the conversation. And I think the last one I'll talk about in this particular segment is that 75% of organizations that we surveyed felt that sustainability is a critical factor, an increasingly critical factor in their procurement choices and in who they who they work with in order to help themselves be more secure and more sustainable in the modern world. So no doubt, very, very interesting statistics for us, and certainly validated our approach and validated the hypotheses that we have in this particular space. But David, perhaps, first question, and introduce you back into the conversation is, how do you recommend organizations get visibility of their infrastructure assets, and how important is that really as part of an infrastructure lifecycle management program?
Yeah, Gary, let me help answer that. It's extremely important, right? And the way you go about doing that is really understanding your assets. The first thing to do that is commitment. So it's organizational commitment from top to the bottom to the top, all levels. It's mandatory. Because why? Most companies, they don't understand all of their assets. They want to know where any asset, where any infrastructure device, where any software license is from the point of order to the point they decommission that device. Well, that's great. But then you take all those assets and, well, there's some in operational state and some that may be on a shelf waiting for warehouse, staging, spares, et cetera. And knowing where all of that is, it's extremely important. And then you add on top of that, so that's company-wide. You add on top of that the different business units inside of a company that may be responsible for a piece of those assets, and they're not necessarily very siloed, not necessarily talking to each other. This adds to this whole chaotic, unoptimized, inconsistent view of what's there, which introduces risk and devalues your investment. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first thing you need to do is get that commitment. Second is, what data do we have? What are we talking about for each asset? Each asset can be described in different ways. It's multiple sides of the same coin. You're going to have your own data, which may be collectors providing asset information, data elements to describe that asset, where it is, how long has it been online, et cetera. And then you have the manufacturer's data about that asset. They're going to know, they're going to know what size and how much it weighs, or its sustainability impact of that device, including its SKU and pricing and all that good information that the manufacturing has that's truthful about it. Then you have your partner's information, which may be when it was purchased, or how long those contracts are running. So you've got all that data. So in order to really understand what's there, all of that has to be brought together. It's not just one single source. It's multiple sources that feed into a unified source of truth, if you will. And understanding where all that data is. And once you have that, now you got to collect it, you got to cleanse it, normalize it. So get it all to match the asset normalization, and then consolidate it. So each of those sources, those data elements that describe the asset, are brought together. Once you're able to do that, then it's applying analytics, it's applying business intelligence or AI against those assets to let that data help you with making your business decisions that you need to make. And then finally, once you get it there, that's only the start. Now you need processes that will help ensure that unified source of truth is kept up to date, that data is as accurate as possible over time. And then the business processes that plug into the use of that data to answer the questions that they need. Highly complex, but is how we go about the data process.
Yeah, David, that's such a great answer. Thank you for that. Very, very insightful. And so, it's all about the data. I think that's what I'm hearing from you. And gaining visibility is always the first step in any program like this. So you need to understand what you have in order to take action into the future. So great answer, and thank you very much for that level of detail. Roberto, perhaps I'm bringing you into the conversation now. And so, what I'd like to ask you is, we've seen the manufacturers disaggregating hardware and software, different buying programs for all of these things. And, our growth in subscription software is a key kind of, I suppose, statistic to prove the point that certainly the whole world is moving that way. So would you mind just describing, what these kind of changes to software buying programs are? And then more importantly, how that impacts infrastructure lifecycle management, please.
Yeah, I think the kind of problem, if like, or challenge is not so much the change in the software buying programs, because they've been around for like as much as computers have been around. I think it's 70 years or so, maybe the state machines. So the point is that we are mainly working we do it on a daily basis with technology and vendors that actually are moving from hardware to a hybrid between hardware and software, getting the best out of the two, and not necessarily going to market because of the pace of evolution, acquisitions, etc. In the same way. There isn't a single buying program for most of our technology vendors that you can just use. Yeah, maybe there are, but most of those are like different options, and it's difficult for our clients, to make the right choices. You can buy software with pretty much software buying options which are similar to traditional software vendors, but there's a strong correlation between hardware and software in a lot of the technology. So you got this challenge that, as David said, data is key, but the context is also important. So you can collect data, but there is a correlation between your hardware assets, what you know about your network, for instance, assets, and the constraints and the relation with the software that you can run on it. And you buy them differently, different terms, different conditions, different licensing models. It happens. It's actually the case in many cases. But actually, it's one network, it's one infrastructure, and it needs to work. So you need good visibility, not only of the assets as themselves, but also the relationship and a good understanding of how your infrastructure is interacting with your software, a good understanding of how you should buy that software and plan in the future, as well as you're going to refresh your hardware infrastructure in a way that they keep in sync. You don't want to end up, there are several pitfalls that every customer would dearly like to avoid, having fantastic software features, but not the right action infrastructure plan to use those features, or the other way around, pretty new hardware, but then not able to actually run the features that are needed for the business. You don't want to also spend too much. You don't want to overspend, right? Because you can't really see the interactions, and you make a mistake in the capacity planning, and you don't want to under spend. You find yourself crossing some boundary and getting a big throw up from your vendor. And that's for one vendor. Typical infrastructure isn't made by one vendor only, so the problem becomes bigger. So you need qualified support and tools, good tools and good support in getting the visibility to plan your way in the best way and optimize your spend.
Yeah, and I know, David, you got a comment on this one as well. But before we get there, Roberto, I think, just perhaps an anecdote to bring that to life. I remember talking to you, and you were engaging with a client, and they had over 200 renewal dates in their infrastructure because, they typically buy these things piecemeal, and they buy a piece of technology with a 12-month contract, and they buy lots of different technologies, and all of a sudden they had 200 renewal dates in a year. I mean, that's just completely unmanageable and completely, very, very difficult to manage given long procurement cycles, etc. So it's getting a handle on that kind of stuff, co-terminating dates, making the whole process that much more simple to manage will significantly improve these things. But David, I know you also had a comment on this one too.
Yeah, Gary. So this whole decoupling of software from hardware, not as much of an issue as software, because now software then leads to, actually our data shows back in 2020, so four years ago, nearly less than 4 years ago, our data shows that perpetual software, so software purchased with the device, was greater than 60% of the software sales. Today, in 24, we're seeing that to be less than 10%. So that means 90% of the software is purchased as a subscription. And the subscriptions are entitled so many different ways per user, per device, or per day, per month, year, per CPU. So it gets very complex. So that decoupling has added to this complexity. And then you add on top of that different buying models like enterprise agreement. Let's bundle all the software together into a single agreement, which helps simplify it, but adds yet another way to purchase that, for a client. So that complexity requires highly skilled people to help manage. And it's stuff that hasn't been thought about before, right? The licensing experts, actually more than one licensing experts because of multi-vendors and et cetera. So in order to optimize, and remember, the overall goal is to make sure that we have visibility of what the entitlements are in those contracts, what licenses have been purchased, so that we can optimize and reduce cost and increase the value of that purchase.
Yeah, David, thank you. That was a fantastic additional comment there, and it leads perfectly onto the next question, which was also for Roberto, but David, please jump in as well. We've spoken about all these different buying programs, and I think we alluded to it earlier, is that when you have multiple manufacturers in your environment, and let's face it, every 100% of our clients have multitude of manufacturers' technology deployed in their environment for different things, and they're all have different buying programs. They're all trying to, do things slightly differently with their own unique capabilities. Roberto, starting with you, perhaps, how much complexity does that add, to the whole infrastructure lifecycle management challenge?
Well, yeah, of course, you're almost dictating the answer, which is a lot, because you can see a lot of variations, and which are justified by the different nature of technologies. So different types of, again, how do you meter those like subscriptions? How do you count? What's the count of what? And sometimes you got even credits. You can exchange licenses. It's almost like based on a need. So it's very difficult to stay up to date on what you actually have and what you're using. Also, another aspect is that often, because we are talking about a specific area of technology, not so much transitional software vendors, many typical software asset management tools do not cover these vendors and these technologies. So there's almost still a gap in how an organization can collect and have a view of that information of licenses in this hybrid world of hardware and software together. So it's actually quite complex. And again, you need a qualified support in that area.
Great. Roberto, thank you. In fact, just going back to our research, this was, again, one of the statistics, and the number one challenge that our clients in our survey responded to when they were asking them what are the biggest challenges in lifecycle management, is understanding the buying programs from the multitude of partners that they work with, and then managing that process to get the best from the infrastructure and making sure that they're not facing any risk. So it's certainly a massive challenge. I'm going to throw in a quick question from the audience that's just come through, and I'll take the first stab at it, is how much risk does running aged technology actually pose to the business? And it's a really, really good question, because some of our clients would say, look, I've had this piece of technology in my environment for 4 years. It's given amazing service. I'm going to continue with it, and why not? And I suppose the thing to look at is where is it in the infrastructure? And if the manufacturer stops supporting it, or stops providing patches for it, or stops providing updates and service for it, something goes wrong, how much risk does that piece of infrastructure deliver for the business? If there's a security patch needed, you're not going to get it. So again, it depends on the infrastructure. And so I suppose it's all about perhaps looking at intelligent asset sweating. If there's a particular part of the environment that maybe is very, very high risk, really, really core to the business, you never advocate running any old technology there because it's just the risk that it poses. But if there was a low risk environment, I suppose as the provider of technology, we would always advocate having the most recent modern technology in your environment always. But as an organization, you need to weigh up the risks and see where you are. I suppose the other aspect of this is that modern technologies allow you to execute in a modern way. And some of the old technologies don't have the features, the functions, or the capabilities that modern business needs in order to be successful. So that's also a factor that you need to consider. But yeah, we would always say that aged technology does carry quite a bit of risk with it, and you need to go into that with your eyes open. Great. So moving on, David, I think the question for you here is, how would you recommend organizations improve their infrastructure lifecycle management process?
Yeah, Gary. So in the data and what we saw with all the stats and whatnot that we came up with from that survey, we realized that it comes down to clients really not knowing. So what we put together, and if you download, we have some links to get the data. But what it comes down to is a framework and operating from a framework that we've put together on getting a handle and driving an infrastructure lifecycle management practice. First step or first stage of that framework is developing that holistic view. Understand your assets, understand what's there. That could start. Don't try to boil the ocean, as we say. Start simple. Just get whatever asset information you have, or whatever asset information the vendor has for you. Bring it in, start looking at it, see how accurate and visible it is. And so that'll start getting that idea of, well, what do we have? And then around that is, and almost as equal to, is developing that lifecycle management methodology, or that process, that governance from an organization, so that set boundaries, like we are going to, for this set of assets, we're going to have this type of coverage for it because it has this amount of risk to it if it went down. So playing off of your answer earlier, or looking at the value it brings to the organization from a competitive standpoint. Any different ways to grade that your assets, so that you can start then understanding, what coverage do I need? How risk tolerant am I? How much security risk am I running on having those assets? So getting that governance place is that step 2. Step 3, then we get into, now that you have your assets, you have some good processes, you understand what's needed, what's not. Now you can start weighing those rules against the number one probably is hardware software incompatibility. So what do we look at there? We're looking at primarily end of life type scenarios, last day of support on both hardware and software. We ran data for a client this week, and what was amazing to me is that if we looked at last day of support on their chassis, so think switches, routers, that type of thing, when we ran that, it looked like they were well managed. The last day of support on those, they had a few coming up. It was less than 10% of their environment was coming due in the next 3 years. Good situation. However, depending on the risk, if we change that metric to end of software maintenance, meaning that's the last date that the vendor plans to provide any additional input, any additional features, it ends up being that over 20% of their environment was coming end of software maintenance in the next year. It just flipped the whole thing on its head. And just knowing that immediately, now let's weigh that against our rules that we put in place for the company. And so we know how to address and future-proof our network, if you will. So that's one example. So that's number 3, is minimizing your hardware and software compatibility. Finally, you're doing that, you're doing all the right things. Now we get to not finally, but we get to streamlining, optimizing your environment. So this is where you're starting to look at your support contracts, consolidating, as you mentioned, 200 support contracts are coming due, unmanageable. Well, let's bring those together under a single support contract. Let's think about support contracts from asset type. And then we can start looking at even your software, and maybe it does make sense to bundle into an enterprise agreement and optimize that purchasing power of everything that you're purchasing in those different technologies. And then finally is, we can't ignore sustainability at this point. We want to make sure that what we're putting in the environment is has a smaller carbon footprint than what the device it's replacing, and plus other methodologies to drive that sustainability. That's the five framework.
Yeah, David, that's I love that. The way you've described it is really structured, and it makes perfect sense to me. So thank you very much for that insight. I mean, we do have another audience question come in around how does an effective lifecycle management program really help build the infrastructure or business relevant infrastructure and evolving technological landscape. I'll take a stab at this, and guys, please jump in as you need to. But I mean, effectively, lifecycle management, once you've got the data and you kind of have visibility of what you have in your infrastructure, that gives you incredible amounts of information to take action on, and you can then start reducing your risk, making your life easier by consolidating renewal dates, perhaps moving to an enterprise agreement, which makes your software procurement cycle so much more easy, so much simpler to manage. So getting that in handle will just make the operational aspects of keeping your infrastructure up and running so much better. But I think the other angle to this is you need to have a much better view of the business objectives, and what does the infrastructure deliver for the organization, in order to weigh up whether modernizing the technology just really does make sense. And so it's like, do we need to improve employee experience in the workplace? Okay, well then maybe a network and a new collaboration suite would make sense for meeting rooms. Or are we looking to improve the security posture? Okay, well then refreshing our security technologies in order to mitigate the risks that we're facing as an organization makes perfect sense. Or are we moving to IoT and industrial Ethernet, industrial network working? Okay, well then, so it depends on the business aspects of this. And one of the other pieces of research that we did a couple of years back was really highlighted the fact that often business strategy and IT strategy are disconnected. And I think that the point is those things need to be brought together, because ultimately, as we've been saying at the start of the conversation, it's the digital infrastructure, the infrastructure we have that ultimately allow the business to execute in the modern world. So those things really do need to be brought very closely together. But look, we're coming up for the end of the session, and we have just a minute or so to go. So I think I just wanted to firstly thank both Roberto and David very, very much for attending the session. It's fantastic to get your insights, and certainly your experience comes through in the way that you speak. And for the audience, we will certainly be putting some links into the chat for you to go and get access to the full report, as well as an infographic that'll show you how to get more information around infrastructure lifecycle management. And of course, as an organization, we would love to engage with you at any point in your infrastructure journey to help you with the data and help you move forward with your infrastructure so that you can execute your strategy in a digital world. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for attending the session. Really do appreciate it, and all the very best.
Thank you.
At NTT, we push the boundaries of what is possible. We're trusted globally to connect data, things, and people in ways that transform and improve business, society, and the planet. Every day we work together to create new connections, new insight, and new value, delivering IT services and solutions across a breadth of world-class technologies. In collaboration with leading partners, helping our clients across healthcare, education, smart cities, manufacturing, retail, and more, to accelerate positive change. We're renowned for some major inventions, like emojis used by billions globally to express themselves without using words. and launching the first enterprise multi-country private 5G solution. We're one of the world's leading network providers. And we're the technology partner that powers the Tour de France, revolutionizing the viewing experience for the world's most watched sporting event. It's our belief in possibility that drives us, but it's our people that make it happen. At NTT, what you do matters. What are you waiting for? NTT. Here you can.